Mark Thompson stood in front of the tall mirror in his small, cluttered apartment, the bustling sounds of New York City filtering through the window. He adjusted his tie, a deep navy blue that contrasted sharply with his crisp white shirt. The reflection staring back at him revealed a man in his late 30s, with dark hair slightly tousled and eyes that carried the weight of unspoken worries. Today was crucial. Today, he would step into the courtroom to defend Sarah, a whistleblower embroiled in a high-stakes corporate corruption case, and the pressure felt almost tangible. His gaze shifted to the desk behind him, where an antique pen lay, gleaming under the soft light of a nearby lamp. It was an exquisite piece, crafted from dark mahogany and gold, with intricate engravings that whispered of stories long past. This pen had belonged to his late father, a revered attorney whose legacy loomed large over Mark's life. His father had taught him the importance of truth, justice, and integrity, principles that seemed to have become increasingly elusive in the world he now inhabited. He reached for the pen, feeling its weight in his hand. Memories flooded back. His father sitting at this very desk, writing legal briefs late into the night, the soft scratch of the nib against the paper creating a rhythm that had comforted Mark as a child. "Always remember, Mark," his father would say, "what we do in court is not just about winning, it's about standing up for what is right." As he stood there, lost in thought, the gravity of the upcoming trial pressed down on him. Mark could hear his father's voice echoing in his mind, reminding him of the responsibility that came with their profession. He felt a surge of determination. Today he would honor that legacy, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. "Mark, are you ready?" The voice of his assistant, Jenna, broke through his reverie. She stood by the door, her expression a mix of concern and encouragement. "Yeah, I'll be right there," he replied, giving the pen one last lingering glance before placing it carefully in his pocket. The courthouse loomed ahead, a stark monument of justice and authority. As Mark navigated the marble halls, he spotted Sarah sitting alone on a bench, her hands nervously twisting the strap of her bag. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I can do this. What if they don't believe me?" He knelt down beside her, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Hey, you've got to trust the truth. We've prepared for this, and I'm here for you. Just remember, you're not alone in this." "But what if they turn it against me? The corporation has so much power. They've been silencing people like me for years." Sarah's voice broke, and Mark could see the fear etched on her face. "Then we fight back," he said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have the facts on your side, and we will make sure your voice is heard. Remember, your courage to come forward is already a victory." She took a deep breath, nodding slowly as if trying to absorb his words. "Okay, I'll try. I just hope it's enough." "Let's make it enough," Mark replied, standing up and extending his hand. Sarah took it, and together they walked toward the courtroom, their footsteps echoing in the grand hallway. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Mark felt his heart rate quicken as he took in the sight of the judge's bench, the jury box, and the opposing counsel, Mr. Edwards, who sat with an air of smug confidence. Mark had faced him before, an experienced lawyer known for his ruthless tactics. Today, however, Mark was determined to stand his ground. He took a seat at the plaintiff's table, glancing at the stack of documents before him. His mind raced with strategies, but amidst the chaos, the antique pen in his pocket served as a reminder of his father's teachings. As the judge entered, Mark straightened his back and focused, pushing aside his fears. "Court is now in session," Judge Harrington announced, his voice firm and commanding. "We are here today to hear the case of Thompson versus Apex Corp. Let's begin with the opening statements." Mark rose to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him, and he knew he had to make this count. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we stand to expose a corporation that has prioritized profits over ethics, a corporation that has silenced those brave enough to speak out for what is right." As he spoke, he glanced at Sarah, whose eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of hope and fear reflected in her gaze. He continued, weaving a narrative of deceit and corruption, painting a picture of a company that had betrayed its employees and the public trust. After his opening statement, it was time for Sarah to take the stand. Mark watched her, his heart racing as she stepped up, the weight of her truth resting on her shoulders. He had prepared her well, but he knew that the pressure of the courtroom could be overwhelming. "Ms. Thompson," the opposing counsel began, his tone condescending, "you claim to be a whistleblower. But tell us, what exactly were you hoping to gain by coming forward? Wasn't it true that you were simply disgruntled after being overlooked for a promotion?" Mark could see Sarah's face pale, her confidence wavering under the harsh scrutiny. He felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. "Objection, Your Honor," he interjected, unable to remain silent. "The witness's motivations are not relevant to the facts at hand." Judge Harrington raised an eyebrow, but allowed the questioning to continue. "Answer the question, Ms. Thompson," Mr. Edwards pressed. I just wanted to do the right thing," Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't stay silent when I knew what was happening." The trial continued, and with each passing hour, Mark grappled with his growing anxiety. He had to fend off attacks on Sarah's credibility while maintaining focus on the evidence. As the morning session drew to a close, he realized that the antique pen resting in his pocket was more than just a reminder of his father. It was a symbol of the fight ahead. As the judge called for a recess, Mark stepped outside to gather his thoughts. He leaned against the cool stone wall, taking a deep breath. The weight of the case felt heavier than ever. "Mark!" Jenna approached him, concern etched on her face. "How do you think it's going?" "It's hard to say," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah is struggling, and I can't help but feel that we're not prepared for the onslaught of their tactics." "Just remember you're doing your best," she said, offering a supportive smile. "You've got this. You carry your father's legacy with you." Mark nodded, the thought giving him a flicker of reassurance. "I just hope it's enough." As they returned to the courtroom, Mark's heart raced. He felt the antique pen's comforting weight in his pocket, a reminder of the principles he held dear. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, determined to bring the truth to light and honor his father's legacy in the process. The trial was only beginning, and with every challenge he could feel the threads of his father's teachings weaving into his resolve. "Let's do this," he whispered to himself as he took his seat, ready to fight for justice, no matter the cost. Mark felt the weight of the antique pen in his pocket as he sat in the courtroom, a tangible reminder of his father's legacy. The air in the room was electric with tension, the kind that crept into the bones of everyone present. The trial had become a battleground, and Mark was acutely aware that he was stepping into a fight that was far more personal than he had anticipated. As the opposing counsel, Mr. Edwards, rose to present his case, Mark's heart raced. There was a confidence in Edwards's demeanor that unnerved him. The man had a reputation for being ruthless, and Mark could feel his piercing gaze sweeping over him, assessing him like prey. Mark recalled their last encounter, years ago, when a case had gone awry, and Edwards had made a name for himself at Mark's expense. The memory was a raw wound that refused to heal. "Your Honor," Edwards began, his voice smooth and commanding, "the evidence we will present today will unequivocally prove that Ms. Sarah Miller is not the whistleblower she claims to be, but rather a cog in the very corporate machine she alleges to oppose." Mark clenched his jaw, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. He could see Sarah sitting at the plaintiff's table, her hands nervously fidgeting in her lap. She had risked everything to stand up against the corporation, and now her credibility was under assault. He glanced at her, trying to convey a sense of reassurance despite the storm brewing within him. "Objection, Your Honor," Mark interjected, his voice steadier than he felt. "Mr. Edwards is making assumptions without evidence. We are here to determine the facts, not to attack the character of the witness." Judge Harrington glanced over at Mark, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Sustained, Mr. Edwards. Please stick to the evidence at hand." Edwards smirked, but Mark knew this was just the beginning. The man had a personal vendetta, and there was no telling how far he would go to undermine Mark's case. As the day wore on, each question Edwards posed to Sarah felt like a dagger aimed directly at Mark's heart. Sarah's responses were shaky, and Mark sensed the inconsistency creeping into her testimony. "Ms. Miller," Edwards said, leaning forward, his voice dripping with skepticism, "you claim to have witnessed illegal activities within the corporation. However, isn't it true that you were complicit in these actions until you were caught?" "Objection!" Mark shouted again, unable to suppress his mounting frustration. "That question assumes guilt and is entirely out of line." "Withdrawn," Edwards replied, his grin widening. "But let's talk about your motivations, shall we? You had a comfortable job. What changed?" Mark could see Sarah's hands tremble as she struggled to maintain her composure. The truth was that the stakes were higher than either of them had anticipated. If Sarah faltered now, everything Mark had worked for would crumble, like a house of cards. He leaned forward, desperate to read her expression, to find some assurance that she was still with him. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, as the courtroom murmured around them, "just focus on your truth. Remember why you're here." She nodded slightly, but her eyes were glazed with fear. Mark's mind raced back to his own past mistakes, the case that had haunted him, the one that had cost him his confidence and nearly his career. He couldn't allow history to repeat itself. As the lunch recess was called, Mark stepped outside the courtroom, needing fresh air and a moment to gather his thoughts. He paced the hallway, running a hand through his hair. Just then, Laura, his mentor and a seasoned attorney, appeared beside him. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her expression serious. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's Sarah," he admitted, turning to face her. "I don't know if I can trust her. There are inconsistencies in her story, and Edwards is using them like a weapon." Laura frowned, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "What do you mean? The stakes are high, but you've got to remember why she's here. She's risking everything to expose the truth." "I know," Mark said, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "But what if she's not innocent? What if I'm just setting myself up for another failure?" "Listen to me," Laura said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've come too far to turn back now. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, dig deeper. But don't let fear dictate your choices." Her words resonated, but doubt lingered in Mark's mind. The trial resumed, and as they settled back into their seats, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than the case at hand. When Sarah returned to the stand, Mark held his breath, hoping she would find her footing. "Ms. Miller," he began, trying to inject a sense of calm into the atmosphere, "can you tell us about the specific events that led you to become a whistleblower?" She took a deep breath, her voice steadier now. "I witnessed unethical practices within the company, manipulating financial records, hiding losses. I couldn't stay silent any longer." Mark watched as she spoke, hoping to see the resolve he knew she possessed. The more she shared, the more the courtroom leaned in, captivated by her story. But as she continued, Mark noticed a subtle shift in her narrative, a hesitation that sparked a flicker of doubt in his gut. "Is there anyone who can corroborate your story?" Edwards interjected again, his tone sharp. "Or is this just your word against a multi-million-dollar corporation?" "Objection, Your Honor," Mark interjected, feeling a surge of protectiveness for Sarah. "That question is prejudicial and irrelevant." The judge nodded, but Mark could see the cracks beginning to form in Sarah's testimony. She fumbled with her words, and the confidence he had seen earlier began to wane. "Sarah," Mark said softly after the judge called for a break, "if there's anything else you need to tell me, please do. I can help you, but I need to know the truth." She hesitated, eyes darting around. "I didn't want to involve anyone else, Mark. I thought I could handle it alone." "What do you mean?" he pressed, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "I was afraid. I didn't realize how deep it went," she whispered. "They know I'm talking. I'm scared." Mark's heart sank. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. The fear in her voice echoed his own anxieties about the trial, about his past failures. He had to protect her, but his instincts were screaming at him to question everything. As the proceedings came to a close for the day, Mark found himself standing outside the courthouse, the weight of the pen in his pocket, a constant reminder of the legacy he bore. He was on the verge of a revelation, but the path ahead seemed murkier than ever. "Mark," Laura called out as she approached, "how are you holding up?" "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my grip. What if I can't save her? What if she's not who I think she is?" "Then you dig deeper," she replied firmly. "You owe it to yourself to uncover the truth. Whatever that may be, Don't let your past dictate your future. He nodded, her words sinking in, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. As he looked up at the looming courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. The legacy of his father, the burden of his past, and the fragile trust he placed in Sarah weighed heavily on him. With a deep breath, Mark made his way home, the antique pen feeling heavier than ever in his pocket. He had to confront not just the case, but the truths he had buried for so long, and the journey ahead was sure to test everything he believed about justice, loyalty, and himself. The dim light of Mark Thompson's small office flickered as he pored over the stacks of documents sprawled across his desk. It was late, much later than he had intended to stay, but the urgency of the situation pressed heavily upon him. The antique pen, a gift from his father, lay beside him, gleaming with an almost eerie allure under the flickering bulb. He picked it up, its weight both comforting and suffocating. The intricate carvings on its surface seemed to whisper secrets, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to the unraveling case he was entrenched in. He had spent hours combing through Sarah's statements and the files provided by her former employer. There was something nagging at him, something that didn't fit right, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't belong. With each page he flipped, his instincts screamed louder, urging him to dig deeper. Mark turned on his laptop, the screen illuminating his tired face, and began a digital search for any connections between Sarah and the corporation she had accused. As he navigated through corporate records, his heart raced. With each click, the weight of his father's legacy loomed larger. Mark knew his father had been a celebrated attorney, a man who fought passionately for what he believed in. But now, as he faced this tangled web of deceit, he wondered if that legacy was as unblemished as he had always believed. A name caught his eye, an executive from the corporation who had authored a series of emails that hinted at a cover-up. As he read through the communications, his pulse quickened. They mentioned Sarah directly, discussing her role in a project that involved unethical practices. The words leaped off the screen, "Ensure she remains compliant." Mark's stomach twisted. Was Sarah coerced into this? Or was she complicit in the very corruption she claimed to be exposing? Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a reminder of the time he was losing. He needed answers. Sarah had painted herself as a victim, but if this evidence held any truth, he had to confront her. The thought of confronting her filled him with dread, but he could feel the tension in the air thickening, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning came too quickly. Mark arrived at the courthouse, the antique pen tucked safely in his pocket, a talisman against the uncertainty that lay ahead. He spotted Sarah sitting in the waiting area, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "Mark," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are we ready for today?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "We need to talk about something first," he said, gesturing for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the courthouse. As they stepped away from prying ears, Mark's heart raced. "I found some documents last night," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "Emails that suggest you might have had more involvement with the corporation than you let on." Sarah's expression shifted from anxious to defensive. "What do you mean?" she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I'm telling you the truth." Mark held up a hand to calm her. "I believe you felt pressured, but the evidence suggests you were part of the project. Did you have any choice in the matter?" "I was coerced," she insisted, her eyes swimming with desperation. "They threatened my job, my life. I had no option but to go along with it. If I didn't, they would have destroyed me." Mark studied her face, searching for signs of deception. "Why didn't you say anything earlier? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared, Mark. This isn't just some legal battle. It's life or death for me. They have connections, people who would—" She paused, her voice trailing off as she looked around nervously. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Mark felt a rush of empathy, but it was mingled with doubt. "If you're telling the truth, then we need to gather more evidence. We need to find a way to protect you." "Protect me?" she echoed incredulously. "You don't understand. If they find out I'm talking to you, I won't just lose my job. They'll come after me. I can help you, Mark urged, his resolve hardening. But I need the whole truth from you. If you're hiding something, it could jeopardize everything. Sarah looked away, her breath hitching. I promise I'm not hiding anything. I can't go back to them. I can't. Mark's heart sank. He wanted to believe her, but the nagging doubts persisted. He needed to know if she was truly innocent or if she was playing a deeper game. I'll do whatever it takes to help you, but you have to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I'll try. I need you to understand how dire this is. The tension between them hung thick in the air as they exchanged glances, both searching for answers in each other's eyes. Mark felt the weight of the case pressing down on him, but more than that, he felt the crushing burden of his father's legacy. The pen in his pocket seemed to pulse with significance, reminding him of the values instilled in him during his upbringing. Yet here he was, standing at a crossroads of morality. As they returned to the courtroom, a heaviness settled in Mark's chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was lurking just out of reach, like a shadow in the corner of his vision. The trial began, and for the first time, Mark found it hard to concentrate. He glanced at Sarah, who sat nervously in the witness stand, her eyes darting around the room. The prosecution called forth witnesses, each one painting a damning picture of the corporation's practices. But as Mark listened, he couldn't help but wonder how much of it was real and how much was a carefully constructed facade. When Sarah finally took the stand, Mark's heart raced. She recounted her experiences, her voice trembling, yet determined. I witnessed things that no one should have to see, she stated, her eyes fierce. I had to walk away. I couldn't be a part of that anymore. But as she spoke, Mark noticed the slight tremor in her hands and the way her eyes flickered to the jury, gauging their reactions. Doubt gnawed at him, a persistent whisper that urged him to look closer, to question everything. After the hearing, Mark found himself in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He needed clarity, a way to unravel this tangled web. The antique pen sat heavy in his pocket, its significance weighing on him more than ever. Could it be the key to uncovering the truth? Or was it merely a reminder of the legacy he was trying to uphold? He glanced at Sarah, who was speaking animatedly with her supporters. She looked so vulnerable, yet so fierce. Mark felt a pang of sympathy for her plight, but the doubt still lingered. He needed to protect her. Yes, but at what cost? The courtroom had become a battleground, and he was caught in the crossfire between loyalty and justice. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of deception, and he was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. As he prepared for the next day of trial, he held the antique pen tightly in his hand, feeling its familiar weight ground him. It was time to confront the truth, whatever it might hold. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of tension as the morning session commenced. Mark Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table, his fingers drumming nervously against the polished surface. The antique pen rested beside him, its presence both a comfort and a reminder of the heavy legacy he bore. As the judge called the session to order, Mark stole a glance at the opposing counsel, Mr. Edwards, who wore a smug expression that made Mark's gut churn. Your Honor, I call to the stand Mr. Gerald Peterson, Edwards declared, his voice slicing through the air. Mark's heart sank. He recognized the name immediately. Gerald had been a close friend of his father, a man who had once celebrated their family's victories over fine wine. But now he was being summoned as a surprise witness, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this revelation was part of a larger trap. Gerald, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a weathered face, approached the stand, his demeanor calm yet guarded. The courtroom fell silent as he took his seat, glancing briefly at Mark before focusing on the judge. Mr. Peterson, Edwards began, his tone deceptively gentle. Can you please tell the court about your relationship with the late Thomas Thompson? Gerald hesitated, his eyes drifting to the antique pen. Thomas and I were colleagues, he began, his voice steady. We worked together on several cases. He was brilliant, but he also had a side that not many people knew about. What do you mean by that? Edwards pressed, leaning in slightly, eager to draw out the details. Gerald shifted in his seat, the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. Thomas was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. I often wondered if he was willing to bend the rules to win. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mark felt his pulse quicken, anger flaring within him. How could Gerald say such things? His father had been a man of integrity, had taught him the importance of ethics in the legal profession. Can you provide specific examples of this behavior? Edwards continued, his voice smooth as silk. Gerald's gaze fell to his hands. There was a case, a major corporate fraud case. Thomas was representing the plaintiffs, and there were offers made to him. I didn't approve, but he was always so sure of himself. He convinced me it was for the greater good. Offers? Mark interjected, unable to contain his frustration. What kind of offers? Gerald's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he pressed on. Money, influence. He claimed it would help expose the truth. But later, I learned that some of the evidence we presented was questionable. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Mark's mind raced as he processed Gerald's words. Could it be true? Had his father compromised his values for success? The foundation of everything Mark believed about his father began to tremble. Edward seized the moment. And did you ever witness Thomas engaging in unethical practices during this time? Gerald hesitated, his brow furrowed. I saw him accept gifts from corporate clients, a nice watch, dinners. I told myself it was harmless, but looking back— Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Edwards said, nodding as he sat back. No further questions, Your Honor. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stood to cross-examine Gerald. He needed clarity, needed to defend his father's legacy. Mr. Peterson, you claim that my father accepted gifts and compromised his integrity. But can you prove any wrongdoing? Gerald met Mark's gaze, and for a moment, the years melted away. I can't prove it, Mark, but I've lived with the guilt of not speaking up sooner. I thought I was protecting him. I had no idea how deep the corruption ran. Is it possible that you're misremembering, that your perception of events has been clouded by time? Mark pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. Perhaps, Gerald admitted, but I'm not the only one who's thought this. There are whispers, Mark. Whispers that suggest your father was involved in far more than you realize. The weight of Gerald's words settled heavily in the air, and Mark felt the room spin. Each breath felt labored, and he struggled to maintain his composure. The antique pen suddenly felt like a curse rather than a blessing, its history tainted by the shadows of his father's past. As he returned to his seat, Mark's mind raced. He needed to confront this truth head-on. But how? A part of him wanted to protect the memory of his father, to shield it from the harsh light of reality. But another part, a louder part, urged him to seek the truth, no matter how painful. The session broke for lunch, and Mark stepped outside the courtroom, needing air. The bustling streets of New York felt like a chaotic blur as he walked, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had worked for was crumbling beneath him. Mark! Laura's voice cut through the noise, and he turned to see his mentor rushing toward him. She looked concerned, her brow furrowed. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Gerald testified against my father, Mark replied, his voice strained. He's suggesting that my dad was involved in corrupt practices. I don't know what to believe anymore. Laura's eyes widened, and she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You need to separate the man from the legacy. Just because Gerald says something doesn't make it true. But what if it is? Mark shot back, frustration bubbling over. What if my father wasn't the man I thought he was? What if I've been fighting for a cause that's built on lies? Then you fight to uncover the truth, Laura said firmly. You owe it to yourself and to your father to know what really happened. You can't let fear of the truth dictate your actions. Mark took a deep breath, her words grounding him. I need to know what the pen holds, he murmured, realization dawning on him. It could be the key to understanding everything. Then go back to the office and take a closer look, Laura urged. You might find something that sheds light on this whole situation. With her encouragement resonating in his heart, Mark nodded. He returned to the courthouse, his mind set on uncovering the secrets of the pen. As he walked through the corridors, his heart raced with anticipation. What would he find? Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session resumed, and Mark sat, his thoughts swirling with determination. He glanced at the pen, now feeling like a beacon of hope rather than a burden. Whatever truths lay hidden, he would unearth them. He owed it to his father and to himself. As the gavel struck and the judge called the session to order, Mark felt a new resolve wash over him. He was standing at a crossroads, and though the path ahead was uncertain, he was ready to face whatever truth awaited him, no matter how painful it might be. The courtroom, filled with witnesses and whispers, felt like a battleground where he would fight not just for Sarah, but for the legacy of the man he thought he knew. Mark Thompson stood at the threshold of chaos, the echoes of his decision reverberating through the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, a palpable mix of disbelief, anger, and confusion. He had just implicated Sarah, his own client, in a web of deceit that stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. As the gavel struck down, signaling a recess, a cacophony erupted. Lawyers shouted, reporters clamored for sound bites, and spectators exchanged incredulous glances. Mark's heart raced. He had made a bold choice. But was it the right one? "Mark, what were you thinking?" Laura, his mentor, rushed toward him, her face a mask of concern. "You've just thrown your case away. Do you even realize what you've done?" "I had to," Mark shot back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "The truth needed to come out. I couldn't stand by and let this go unchecked. Justice is more important than winning." "Justice?" Laura's eyes widened in disbelief. "You just handed the case to Edwards on a silver platter. Do you really believe that exposing Sarah helps anyone?" Mark felt the weight of her words, but he couldn't shake the conviction that had driven him. He had seen the glimmer of deceit in Sarah's eyes during her testimony, and it bothered him. The pen, heavy in his pocket, felt like a burden, a reminder of the legacy he was trying to uphold. "What if she's lying?" he countered. "What if we're all just pawns in a game that's far bigger than we know?" Across the room, Sarah stood alone, her face ashen, tears spilling down her cheeks. She was being cornered by reporters, and Mark's heart sank at the sight. He had betrayed her trust, torn apart her carefully constructed world with one reckless move. As he made his way toward her, the chaos of the courtroom faded into the background. "Sarah," he called, his voice strained. She turned, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "I didn't mean for it to come to this. I thought—" "You thought what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling. "That you could save me by throwing me under the bus? You've ruined my life, Mark. I trusted you." "I'm sorry," he said, desperation lacing his words. "I thought that by exposing you, I could uncover a deeper truth. I thought it would help." "Help?" she scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You have no idea what you've done. You've just handed the corporation everything it needs to bury me. They'll destroy me, and you'll be the reason why." Mark felt a tightening in his chest. The reality of his actions began to sink in. "I can help you," he insisted, reaching out to her. "I'll find a way to prove your innocence, I promise." "Prove my innocence?" she echoed, her voice rising. "You're the one who just accused me of being complicit. How can I trust you now?" "Because I believe you," he said, his voice softening. "I believe you were coerced. I believe there's more to this story, but I need your help to uncover it." Sarah's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched across her features. "And what makes you think I have anything left to offer? You've already thrown me to the wolves." "Because I just got a text," he blurted out, feeling a surge of urgency. "An anonymous text. It had a clue, a hint about the corporation and my father's past." Her expression shifted, curiosity mingling with her anger. "What do you mean? What clue?" "It said something about the pen," he replied, pulling it from his pocket and holding it up. "It's not just a relic. It's connected to everything. If we can figure out what it means, it might turn the tide." For a moment, Sarah's fury faltered. She studied the pen, its intricate design glinting under the fluorescent lights of the courthouse. "You really think that's going to help? That a fancy pen can save us?" "It's not just a pen," Mark insisted, his conviction rekindling. "It belonged to my father, and there are secrets tied to it, secrets that might link him to the corporation. If that's true, it could change everything. We can fight back, together. Sarah hesitated, the anger in her eyes softening into something more vulnerable. And if you're wrong? What then? Then we face the consequences together, Mark replied, his voice steady. But I can't let this go. I can't walk away knowing that my father's legacy might be tied to this corruption. We have to find the truth, no matter how painful it is. As they stood there, the noise of the courtroom faded into the background, replaced by the gravity of their situation. Sarah's resolve wavered, and for the first time, doubt crept into her expression. What if the truth is worse than we think? What if it reveals that your father was part of this all along? Mark swallowed hard, the weight of that possibility crashing over him like a tidal wave. Then we deal with it. But we can't let fear guide our actions. We owe it to ourselves, to the truth. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the chaos of the world beyond their bubble fading away. Finally, Sarah nodded, albeit hesitantly. Okay, what do we do? Let's get out of here, Mark urged, glancing nervously toward the courtroom doors. We need to figure this out, now. I can't keep living with this weight. As they stepped outside, the fresh air hit their faces like a splash of cold water. The streets of New York buzzed with life, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were now intertwined in a web far more complex than either of them had anticipated. He glanced at the pen, still clasped tightly in his hand, its significance growing heavier by the moment. I'll investigate everything I can about the pen and its history, he declared. If there's a chance it connects us to the corporation, we need to pursue it. And I'll dig into my past with the company, Sarah added, determination creeping into her voice. I might find something, anything that can help us. As they walked side by side, Mark felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. They were no longer just a lawyer and his client. They were allies united by a shared purpose, standing on the precipice of something monumental. But lurking in the back of his mind was the nagging fear that the truth they sought might be more damaging than either of them could bear. "Mark!" a voice shouted from behind, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a familiar figure rushing toward them. Laura, her expression a mix of urgency and concern. "What now?" Mark wondered aloud, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Listen," Laura said, breathless from her sprint. "I just got a call from a source. There are whispers about your father's involvement with the corporation. You need to be careful. Digging into this could put you both in danger." Mark's heart raced as he locked eyes with Sarah. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. "We're already in danger," he replied, steeling himself. "But we can't back down now." Laura's brows knit together in worry. "I understand, but you need to tread carefully. This is a minefield, and if you're not careful, you could end up buried beneath it." "Then let's figure out how to navigate it," Mark said, resolve hardening within him. "We'll find the truth, whatever it takes." As they stood together, a trio against the storm brewing on the horizon, Mark tightened his grip on the pen, a symbol of legacy, secrets, and the uncertain path ahead. The journey to uncover the truth was only just beginning, and he was determined to see it through no matter where it led. Mark Thompson stood at the edge of the dimly lit warehouse, the musty scent of mildew and decay filling his nostrils. The shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that seemed to whisper secrets long buried. Clutching the antique pen tightly in his hand, he felt the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him. The text message had led him here, to this forsaken place linked to the corrupt corporation that had turned his life upside down. He took a deep breath, summoning the courage to confront whatever truths awaited him. The creaking of the old wooden door echoed ominously as he pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior filled with dust-covered crates and rusting machinery. Faded corporate logos adorned the walls, remnants of a bygone era that seemed both haunting and familiar. He stepped further inside, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. Each step felt like a plunge into the depths of his father's past, a past that was now shrouded in uncertainty. Mark's heart raced as he made his way to a corner of the warehouse, where a flickering light bulb barely illuminated a stack of boxes. He had received the cryptic message hours ago, urging him to look for evidence that would unravel the conspiracy that ensnared Sarah, and, by extension, his father. "What the hell were you involved in, Dad?" he muttered to himself, the question echoing through his mind. As he rifled through the boxes, his fingers brushed against crumpled papers and faded photographs. He pulled out a file labeled Project Titan, his pulse quickening as he opened it. Inside were documents detailing illicit transactions and shady dealings that tied his father to the very corporation he had been battling against in court. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the pages, each word hitting him like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, causing Mark to freeze. He quickly tucked the documents under his arm and ducked behind a stack of crates. Peeking around the corner, he saw Mr. Edwards, the opposing counsel, striding toward him with an air of confidence that made Mark's blood boil. Edwards had been a formidable adversary throughout the trial, but now he seemed to exude an unsettling familiarity with the space. "Mark, I know you're here," Edwards called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't hide forever. This isn't a game." Mark clenched his jaw, his heart racing. He felt like a cornered animal, desperate to escape the trap that had been set for him. "What do you want, Edwards?" he shot back, stepping out from behind the crates, the pen still firmly in his grip. Edwards chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down Mark's spine. "Oh, just a friendly chat. You see, I've been keeping an eye on you. Your little investigation has drawn some unwanted attention." He paused, his gaze narrowing. "Your father had a way of getting himself into trouble, didn't he?" Mark's stomach churned at the mention of his father. "What do you know about my father?" he demanded, trying to maintain an air of bravado. "More than you'd like to think," Edwards replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "He was involved in things that you wouldn't even begin to comprehend. This pen you cherish so much? It's more than just a family heirloom. It holds secrets, secrets that could ruin you." Mark's heart raced as he felt a rush of adrenaline. "What do you mean?" he pressed, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Edwards stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "There's a hidden compartment, Mark. Inside that pen lies evidence, a piece of information that connects your father directly to the corruption at the heart of this case. You're playing with fire, and if you're not careful, you might just get burned." Mark's mind raced as he processed Edwards' words. The pen, a symbol of his father's legacy, was also a potential weapon against everything he believed in. "You're lying," he spat, though a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. "Am I?" Edwards shrugged, feigning indifference. "Why don't you take a closer look? Or better yet, let's see what happens when the truth comes to light. You could be a hero, Mark, or you could be just another casualty in this war. The choice is yours." With that, Edwards turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Mark standing alone amidst the shadows. The weight of the pen in his hand felt heavier than ever. Was his father truly a victim of circumstance? Or had he played a role in the very corruption Mark was fighting against? The questions swirled in his mind, and he knew he had to find answers. As he left the warehouse, Mark's thoughts raced. He drove through the empty streets of New York City, the glow of the streetlights illuminating his path. The pen lay on the passenger seat, almost calling to him. He pulled over, the engine idling in the stillness of the night. His hands trembled as he picked it up, examining every inch of the antique. He noticed a tiny seam along the barrel, a hidden compartment, just as Edwards had said. With a deep breath, Mark fumbled to open it, his heart pounding in anticipation. After a few moments of struggle, the compartment clicked open, revealing a small, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, revealing a series of names and dates that made his breath hitch. It was a ledger detailing transactions between his father and the corporation, implicating him in dealings that could destroy everything Mark had worked for. "No," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of his thoughts. "This can't be true." But as he read through the names, the connections became undeniable. His father had not only been a part of the system, he had been entrenched in it. Feeling the weight of betrayal, Mark slammed his fist against the steering wheel. The truth was like a knife twisting in his gut. He had spent his life trying to uphold the values his father had instilled in him, only to find that those values were built on a foundation of lies. What was he going to do now? The trial was still ongoing, and the evidence he had just found could either be his salvation or his destruction. As he sat there in silence, the enormity of the decision before him loomed like a dark cloud. He could expose his father's involvement and risk losing everything: the respect of his peers, his career, and the memory of the man he had idolized. Or he could bury the truth, allowing history to repeat itself, continuing the cycle of corruption that had haunted his family for generations. Tears stung his eyes as he gripped the pen tighter, feeling its cold metal bite into his palm. "I won't let this define me," he murmured, determination rising within him. "I'll find a way to make it right." As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the city, Mark knew he had a choice to make. He could either continue the fight for justice, even if it meant confronting the painful legacy of his father, or he could let the shadows of the past consume him. He took a deep breath, preparing for the battle ahead, knowing that the truth could set him free or shackle him to a legacy he was desperate to escape. With the pen as both a weapon and a reminder of what he stood to lose, Mark Thompson was ready to face the consequences of his choices, whatever they may be. It was time to step into the light, even if it meant confronting the darkness first.